we're going to, I guess related to the last topic we talked about was making an early Shabbos, so now flipping and moving to making an early Yom Tov, and specifically making an early Yom Tov Sheini, the second day of Yom Tov. So there are two reasons why I came to this topic. One was last year, so the shul here, just to I guess to let everyone know, the shul here, and most shuls in Toronto and probably North America, even though they'll make an early Shabbos, will not make an early second day of Yom Tov unless the second day of Yom Tov is Shabbos. So for example, 8th day Pesach this year was Shabbos. So we made an early, there were two minyanim, there's an early minyan for the 8th day of Shabbos, for the 8th day of Pesach, which was Shabbos. The second day of Shavuos, which was Monday, there was no early minyan. So that's the policy here, and I would say majority of shuls. But last year somebody told me that one of these, a neighborhood minyanim, they were making an early second day Yom Tov, which kind of got me, okay, a bit upset, but not so upset. I hadn't really looked at the topic yet. And then they told me not only that, but they made the following claim, that one of the issues of making between one day of Yom Tov to the next is you're not allowed to prepare from one day of Yom Tov to the next. It's not, so we're davening Marv later because you can't even start preparing the meal until 9:30, whatever. So they said not only that, they said, but because you're making early, and it's still like the first day, you can start preparing from the first day, on that day for the meal later today. So that got me really upset. Like upset? Yeah, I was upset. So that can't be right. We'll see how I'm probably wrong. Or there certainly are opinions, but that was one. And then I came back to it because right after Shavuos, right after Pesach, I was talking with somebody, and they said, anyone here not eat kabrooks on Pesach?
Not
You don't, but you eat on the 8th day. So were you part of this big... on the 8th day this year, were you familiar at all with the discussion going around?
No.
Okay, so the big discussion that I missed on the 8th day, but I heard later, maybe it was more prominent in some of the other places, was that if you make an early 8th day of Pesach, so the custom is even if you don't eat kabrooks, so the 7th day of Pesach, you eat on the 8th day. So now, what happens when you're making an early 8th day of Pesach? What can you do? Everybody obviously has chicken soup and then puts the matzah balls in the chicken soup, and that's how they're Mekayim eating their kabrooks.
That's the reason we made late, because of that reason.
So good. So there you go. So could you put the knedel in the matzah ball in the chicken soup? And I heard that question, I'm like, that's ridiculous. Obviously you can. It's the 8 days. You're starting the 8th day early, and this is all the minhag, which it's all a minhag to begin with. I thought it'd be crazy to assume you can't. But okay, so here.
I can take it even a step further because in Israel I only hold one day.
Okay.
So what we had was on the 8th day, because it was Shabbos.
Yeah.
Okay, we ate kitniyot.
Okay.
Like rice and all kinds of stuff. Because they made so.
So could you? Oh, so that's a better question because that would be.
No, so
because the minhag of kitniyot, I just thought it's better because I think the minhag of kitniyot is stronger than the minhag of kabrooks.
Yeah.
So that's why. But good, that would be the same question. So I heard that and I thought how could you be machmir? It's crazy. And then part of the discussion, somebody was from Bavav, and he said, yeah, I asked how many Bavav, and nobody there cared. Everyone's like, yeah, they all had matzah balls as soon as they made it early. So, but apparently that's not the case. So that's what got me thinking about, okay, so what are some of the ramifications? Can you make an early Yom Tov, and what does it do? Can you eat your matzah balls early if you do make that early Yom Tov Sheini? So just to reiterate, again, the Shulchan Aruch in source number 1, and that's just from the source from Shabbos. Also, we read this 2 weeks ago. Makdimin lispala arvis yosef b'mesachol. You can daven Mariv early. Ubeplug hamincha yafa lahadlik ulekabel Shabbos tefila arvis lefal miyad. That on the erev Shabbos again, you can daven early. You can light candles. You can accept Shabbos. You can eat. You can do all of this before Shabbos begins. And we said it was based on the principle of Tosefes Shabbos, that you're allowed to extend the day of Shabbos itself. And since you can extend it, you can almost bring the kedusha earlier, and therefore you can. We had a discussion whether you should still eat part of your meal after nightfall, but you can fulfill your mitzvahs earlier. And the same principle of Tosefes Shabbos applies to Yom Tov as well. There is an idea of adding on to Yom Tov. It's all based on
but unfortunately, the 3 Yom Tovs, the first days.
So good. So exactly.
Have issues with starting early.
So exactly. When it comes to Yom Tov, so it's not so simple. Why? Because when it comes to Pesach, you can't eat early because it says ba'erev tochlu matzos. So since it says at night, you have to do it after nightfall. So even if we'll daven a bit earlier, we'll daven a bit before nightfall, so you can get home and start your seder right away. But you can't do anything in the seder until nightfall begins. So that means the first night of Pesach you're not making early, and the second night also. So the question is irrelevant for the second night. The same then applies to Sukkot. Because Sukkot, we compare Sukkot to Pesach, and we say the halachos of eating in the Sukkah are connected to the halachos of eating at Pesach. In the same way Pesach has to be done at night, Sukkot has to be done at night. So the first night of Sukkot and the second night of Sukkot are also out the window. So in terms of making...
Why the second night?
The same reason, because the same reason the Seder the second night. Because the eating...
Why the Seder the second night also?
Oh, because if you're concerned that really the second night is the actual Yom Tov, so then you have to fulfill it at night. I mean, the mitzvah you have to do, it's not an issue of doing it on Yom Tov, meaning the issue is you have to do it at night. So whenever you're fulfilling this mitzvah, it has to be done at night. So if we're going to treat the second day as the first day, then we're going to keep the halachos the same in that regard. So that takes care of that. The first night of Shavuos, I'm just going through all the Yom Tov. The first night of Shavuos, we also don't make early. Talk about that a bit, but why? Because we have this principle of Tamimos, that we want to have 7 complete weeks, so we don't like to take away from the days of Sfira into Shavuos, so we also don't make, generally, most people don't make early first night of Shavuos. Somebody told me that there are places that Dafka do make it, because they say, well, might as well, better to make an early Shavuos and learn an extra 3 hours than to wait later, and then, because of this minhag of maybe having this idea of Tamimos, which is a minhag that started on a few hundred years ago, so that's it. But most people, I think, make early. I was reading a book by Denite.
Most people
most people make late. I was reading a book by Denite Gabriel, Rav Zinner, who's a posek in New York, Brooklyn maybe. So he has Sfarim on all the Yom Tovim. He's Hasidish. And he talks about making an early first night of Yom Tov, and he quotes the minhag of the Shif Shul, of the boat shul. I think they make. Rabbi Grisman showed it to me, and showed me where it says, the Shif Shul they daven early. So I didn't ask anybody. I'm assuming that Rabbi Grisman assumed the Shif Shul was here. I don't know if there's a boat shul in New York also, but so that means so.
Captain John's mother just told away.
But so what are we left with in terms of making an early Yom Tov? And let's say an early Yom Tov Sheini, we're really left with the 8th day of Pesach. Second day of Shavuos. In my mind, I think also Simchas Torah, but nobody's going to ever make an early Simchas Torah, but everything always gets so late, I think we should. So that's not going to be a question. And when it comes to some of the other ones, like Rosh Hashanah, it's not, it's early enough in the year where it's not so practical that people aren't, you're not making first early Rosh Hashanah because it's like 7 o'clock anyway, so you're not going to start at 5:40, so there's that. I'm saying the practical question of making an early Yom Tov Sheini is really coming up on this 8th day of Pesach and the second day of Shavuos. So what are the issues? What are the potential issues in making an early second day of Yom Tov? So I want to mainly discuss 2 issues. There are a number of poskim who talk about the question. The first issue is going to relate to, we're going to extrapolate from the laws of Sfiras HaOmer. So if you look in source number 2, the Shulchan Aruch writes, Leil Shabbos v'Leil Yom Tov mevarchim b'sofrim achar kiddush b'beis HaKnesses. So when it comes to davening in shul, we count Sfira after. So if you make Kiddush in shul and you count Sfira in shul, so you're supposed to count Sfira after you make Kiddush in shul. Morning, Michael. Thank you.
Morning.
Everyone, please take. That's fine. I'll just continue to read. Everyone take. I'll just continue to read this source here. So when it comes to, again, if you make Kiddush in shul, count Sfira in shul, make Kiddush first, then count Sfira afterwards. However, Uvemotzai Shabbos v'Yontiv, on the flip side, when it comes to Motzei Shabbos and Motzei Yontiv, Kodem Havdalah Achar Kiddush Tiskabel. So that means that in shul, Kiddush should be made before Sfira, and Sfira should be counted before Havdalah. What's the one exception? Or what's the one problem? The one problem is, let's say the 8th day of Pesach is a Sunday. So that means in the 7th night, between the 7th and the 8th day, not only are you making Kiddush in shul, but part of Kiddush is you have the Havdalah. So the principle was you always make Kiddush before Sfira, and you always count Sfira before Havdalah. Now what happens when Kiddush and Havdalah come together? So you can't fulfill both of those. So the Shulchan Aruch writes, Uchshachal Yom Tov ha'achron shel Pesach b'Motzai Shabbos, in such a case, De'az Omer Kiddush v'Havdalah b'pam achas, Yesh lispor kodem shemevarchim al hakos bebeis hakneses. You should count before you make the bracha on the kos in the shul. So let's sum this up again. Sure. Let's sum this up again in the Shulchan Aruch. The three cases I have one here. Actually, milk and sugar actually would be great. So the cases we have as follows. Kiddush should be made before Sfira. Sfira should be made before Havdalah.
Right.
Now what happens when Kiddush and Havdalah are made in the same time? So let's say again, the 8th day of Pesach is on a Sunday. So that when you're making Kiddush in Shul that night, you're also counting Havdalah, also making Havdalah. So then you count Sfira before the Kiddush Havdalah combo. So that's those are the halachos set up in the Shulchan Aruch. Now what's the Svara? What is the reason for...
But can I just interject
Yeah,
for 1 second?
sure.
But when it comes to Sfira, technically, you got the whole night to count.
Okay.
So why have to squeeze it in like right between Kiddush and Havdalah? Like just forget it and you'll do it later at night before you go to bed.
So we'll see why that's it. Well, first of all, it's never a good option because that's when people start forgetting. So if you have an option, to count in shul, you should always count in shul. Everybody knows that the plug mincha.
Get the right day.
Everyone knows the plug mincha mara is the worst idea when it comes to Sfira. So Omer, it's great for everything else.
Buy yourself a little gadget. You just turn the wheel.
Okay,
put it on the fridge.
okay.
Like going for your midnight snack, then you'll remember.
So why is this important? So let's see why it's important and how it's going to relate to making an early Yom Tov. So the Taz tells us. The Taz is Rav David Levi Asigal. It's one of the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch. So he says, why do we make Kiddush before counting Sfira? The Shabbos nichalan tvei. Even though you've already accepted Shabbos, but Kiddush marks the beginning of Shabbos. So we want to make Shabbos. We want to extend Shabbos as long as possible. So let's bring in Shabbos earlier. Let's make Kiddush first, and only afterwards we'll count Sfira. And then the flip side. Uvemotzai Shabbos, nicha le'achorei afuke Shabbasa. And when it comes to Motzei Shabbos, we want to push off Shabbos. So how do we push off Shabbos? Let's make Havdalah as late as possible. So let's count Sfira before we make Havdalah. So the whole idea is based on extending the day on both ends. Rak b'Yom Tov Achron shel Pesach b'Motzai Shabbos, only on the 8th day, when the 8th day of Pesach and falls out on Sunday, sheyesh Kiddush v'Havdalah. In such a case, mitzarfin lekiddush im Havdalah. V'sofer kami Kiddush. You make it before. So why? Now he writes as follows. Minirali. And he says, I'm going to argue, I'm going to go beyond what the Shulchan Aruch says. So why would that make sense? Why would you make... Seemingly, if you're saying, if you want to make Kiddush always after... If you want to count Kiddush after Kiddush because you want to extend Shabbos, and if you want to make it before Havdalah because you want to extend, so why would you make it before Kiddush and Havdalah together? So it seems like you're trying to extend the first day. That's more important. It's more important for you to extend the first day than to bring the second day earlier. So it's better for you to make Kiddush, to count Sfira before the Kiddush Havdalah combo. So we'd rather extend the first day as opposed to extending the second day. So he writes as follows. Nearly, the Belel shebein Shiva shal Pesach liyom Ches shal Pesach afilu b'chol yesh lispor kodem Kiddush. Why? So now he says, forget this case of the Shulchan Aruch of only when the 8th day of Pesach falls on Sunday. Let's say the 8th day of Pesach falls out on Tuesday. I don't even know if that's possible. But let's say it falls out on Tuesday. So between the 7th and 8th day, you're just making Kiddush. So in such a case, when you're just making Kiddush, still in this case, what does the Taz tell you? Even in that case, yesh lispor kodem Kiddush. You should count before Kiddush. Why? The Yom Tov Acharon. Why? The Hatfei Nichalan Limshoch Alav Kedushas Yom Shvi Shel Pesach Shehu Mina Torah Ukdushas Yom Tov Acharon Inam El Midrabanan. Because he's telling us the following principle: the first day of Yom Tov is Midoraisa. The second day of Yom Tov is Durabanan. Because now we really know the calendar. So even though it's true when it comes to the second night, we want to treat them as similar as possible. But still, we really know in our mind that Pesach's on the first day, and we're keeping the second day to follow the rabbis as a mitzvah derabanan. So he's saying, whenever between the 7th and 8th day, we're always going to want to count Sfira before making Kiddush, because we always want to extend the 7th day into the 8th day, forgetting the Shabbos or anything. Why do we want to extend the 7th day in to the 8th day? Because the 7th day is Doraisa, 8th day is Derabanan. Might as well extend our biblical holiday as long as possible at the expense of the rabbinic holiday, which is going to start immediately afterwards. So that is what the Taz says. So if you take that approach, that would tell you that you obviously couldn't make an early second day of Yom Tov. And what's the issue making an early second day of Yom Tov? The issue is you are taking away from the biblical holiday. You're saying, the rabbis are better than the Torah, so we're extending our rabbinic holiday into the biblical holiday. So the Taz would say you couldn't make an early Yom Tov Sheini for this reason.
Yeah, but it's just, you're going to say, like, okay.
Oh, sorry,
I mean, the assumption is that that you're officially bringing in the second day when you're making the Kiddush.
Okay. So
why not when you're doing Baruch Hu for
Okay, so A, that's a good question, and B, that's what I want to talk about more in terms of how do we mark beginning the day and how do we mark ending the day. So that's what I want to get into. It's a good question why Kiddush, because it's true, Baruch Hu, because we generally assume Friday night once you say Baruch Hu, or even these more shir you've accepted Shabbos. So it's a good question why he's using Kiddush. But either way, you can even say I'm more interested in the principle now than it's true, meaning why he uses Kiddush as opposed to Baruch Hu, I'm not sure. But even once using it, the principle is more important, telling you the principle is you shouldn't take away. So once you should extend the biblical at the expense of the rabbinic, so then that would mean you shouldn't make an early one. Why he uses Kiddush for something else, I'm not sure. But
it's an imaginary line. It's not as if there's, in terms of actual what things other than the four things you discussed, L'Himin Chal that you could do on the second day. It's not as if you're going to bury somebody.
Okay.
So I mean, that line is very imaginary. That dividing line.
Okay. Well, why is it important? It's important for issues like we mentioned of Hachana. You can't prepare from one day to the other. So that's going to be, and practically, that's actually the most important to us nowadays. You're right, because we're not burying people on the second day. So that's not going to make a big difference.
But here you're still missing the thing is that if it's the first day, and let's say you want to make yourself something to eat at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, you can make it, right?
Yeah.
So what's the difference if now we're saying, okay, let's put that line up, make it the second day, and I'll start making dinner now? What's the difference? You see what I'm saying?
No, I understand. So what would make a difference is that, let's say you prepared at 2 o'clock for your meal at 6 o'clock. So whenever Yom Tov is, that would be a difference.
Yeah, I understand that. But if what I'm saying is, if you're using that sort of...
but the point of the matter is, I understand what you're saying in terms of that, but either way, let's say Yom Tov ends at 8 o'clock.
Right.
And you want to start and say, well, I want to daven, I want to end it at 7 o'clock. Well, why are you ushering in the second day? You're ushering in the second day when this first day should still be going for another hour.
The only difference is you're making Kiddush, that's all.
Okay, good. So that's going to be important in terms of why people are going to argue. So that's what the Taz says. I'll just point out we're not going to read to the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah, the last 4 words, if you want to look at source number 4, quotes the Taz and then writes, Aval ha'achronim chalku alav. The Achronim do argue with the Taz. So I think an example and a parallel argument which really highlights this point comes up to starting when it comes down to the division between Sukkot and Shemini Atzeres. Because really they're two different, even though we treat it all as one holiday, they're really 2 separate holidays. So what's the question there that arises is, can you make an early Shemini Atzeres? Can you bring in Shemini Atzeres early? Now why is that a big difference and why does that matter? Because on Sukkot, we have an obligation, but it's a several, I'm focusing on the principle here. On Sukkot, you have to eat in the Sukkah. Shemini Atzeres, we don't have to eat in the Sukkah. Now the custom in Chutz La'aretz is, either if you're Hasidish, you only eat during the day, or if you're Litvak, you probably eat at night during the day, but you don't make a bracha. So the distinction is that there's really a chiyuv to eat for Sukkot, you eat and make a bracha. Shemini Atzeres, you don't eat, don't make a bracha. So let's say you eat, you don't make a bracha.
Yeah, because in Israel, it's really not, you don't eat. It's like, it's a very...
Right, that's even worse. So Israel it'd be even better in Israel, the question. So the question is, can you bring in... The people talk about it in the context of Chutz La'aretz, so we'll keep it there. But so can you start Shemini Atzeres early? Because what's your issue? So obviously you always want to start early because you want to eat early. It's not going to help you to start early and then eat an hour and a half later. So can you have your meal for Shemini Atzeres before nightfall of Shemini Atzeres? So now you have a problem because what's the case?
Where are you going to eat?
Right. Well, let's say even if you're eating in the sukkah, you're eating in the sukkah because you eat in the sukkah Shemini Atzeres, but you don't make a bracha. So now you're stuck because if it's still sukkah,
you should make a bracha.
Right? You should make a bracha. But if it's a bracha, then it's obviously not Shemini Atzeres, so your meal can't count towards Shemini Atzeres. So you're really stuck between. So there's 2 opinions here. The Maharshal. The Marshal is the opinion that for that reason you should not make an early Shemini Atzeres, because if you make it early, then you're really in this midpoint, you're stuck, because you have to eat in the sukkah because it's still sukkahs, but you can't make a bracha because it's Shmini Atzeres, but you have to make a bracha because it's still sukkahs. So he says, don't make it early. You should only push it up and make it regular time, eat at nightfall, and you don't have any of these issues. That's the Maharshal. But the Taz, same Taz we have here, it says, no, you're starting Shmini Atzeres. It's not sukkahs anymore. I know it's still dayfall, it's still day, and you could have pushed off start Shmini Atzeres till later, but you're decided to start Shmini Atzeres right now. Once you're starting Shmini Atzeres right now, it is now Shmini Atzeres. I eat in the sukkah. I do not make a bracha. There's no contradiction. I don't have to be concerned. So the way I want to explain it is that what is the logic behind these two reasons? According to the Taz, whenever you start the second day of Yom Tov, that ends the first day of Yom Tov. So you can never have two overlapping, you can't have a time period which is both first day and second day. It's either one or the other. So that's why when it comes to Shmini Atzeres and Sukkot, he says, if I start Shmini Atzeres early, it is now Shmini Atzeres for me. And if it's now Shmini Atzeres, I can go ahead and I could eat and I don't have to make a bracha, and it's not a problem because it's not Sukkot. So I obviously don't have to make a bracha. And that's the same reason why I think over here, what's the problem of, making this early second day of Yom Tov is because he believes as soon as you make the early second day of Yom Tov, that ends the first day of Yom Tov. So you are taking away from the first day and adding to the rabbinic. I think what the Mishnah Berurah quotes here, that the Achronim argue, and the Maharshal probably believe in this idea of you can have overlapping, what you'll call maybe some idea of overlapping kedushas, that you can, even if you make an early second day of Yom Tov, it doesn't mean that the first day is over. So you can really have both elements at the same time. And that's why he has a trouble between Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres, because then he's stuck. Well, if it's Sukkot, you have to make a bracha. At Shmini Atzeres, you can't, and then you're stuck. So that's why he would tell you not to make early. But at the same time, that viewpoint would tell you that, what's the problem making early Yom Tov Sheini? You're not taking away from the Doraisa. It's both now. It's both, it's the Doraisa and the Darabanan. We can have both elements in the same time period, and there's not going to be a problem. So that would be the svara and the logic that I think would be used in order to explain these two opinions. The Taz versus the other, the Achronim, the Taz versus the Maharshal. So what would be the exception again? We said everybody agrees that in the case of when the 8th day is Shabbos, or the second day of Yom Tov is Shabbos, that you'd make early. So why would people say you can make early? Even let's say the Taz would probably say you can make early, because then it's not Doraisa versus Darabanan. It's Doraisa versus Doraisa, and Shabbos is even more machmir than Yom Tov. The violations, the prohibitions we have on Shabbos are more strict than that we have on Yom Tov. So you'd always be able to extend that into Yom Tov. So that's why he would agree there. He would argue in all other cases. If you argue with the Taz and say, no, you can have these overlapping almost kedushas at the same time, then you don't have an issue. So that would be how to, I think, describe and explain this argument between the Taz and, let's say, the Mishnah Berurah, who says that the Achronim argue with him. The same idea, so there were numerous questions. I just want to talk about some of them. There are several tshuvas that discuss this question. So, for example, the Minchas Yitzchak is Rav Yitzchak Yaakov Weiss, or Yaakov Yitzchak Weiss. He was a Dayan in England and moved to Israel. So he was asked the question that, again, second day of Yom Tov is late in Toronto and probably even later in London. So the issue was that there was an old age home or there was a hospital, I don't remember exactly what to, where many of the residents were Jewish. So they used to send a kolobach or whatever it was to go make kiddush and hamotzi for everybody at the old age home. So the question was, could he make an early Yom Tov Sheini, because no way the hospital or anyone's going to be awake at 10 o'clock in order to make Kiddush for anyone. But if you make it early or whatever the time, you can make it at 8 o'clock or 7:30, so that might, that would be a good solution. So would that be allowed? Would he be permitted to go ahead and make an early Yom Tov? And the Minchas Yitzchak says yes. And part of it he discusses our question in terms of taking away the Kedusha, and he says we don't paskin like the Taz. The Taz says that, but we argue on the Taz and his reasoning for that, so that's not going to hold us back. So that's the one holds back from making early Yom Tov. He has some other funny reasons here that aren't what you would think maybe wouldn't allow you to make an early Yom Tov Rishon. For example, one reason is because the first night of Yom Tov you can't make early, because we said we have this minhag of tamimos. So because you can't do it the first night, we shouldn't do it the second night either, because maybe you'll get confused from the second night to the first night. So he says that's not a good gzeira. He said, like, it makes sense to make a gzeira if something high is at stake. What's at stake here? This minhag of tamimos. I think that's not enough of a reason to make a gzeira. You can't do it on the second night, just because maybe on the first night, which wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if you did it then anyways, you'd make early. And then he has a really radical idea. This relates to something I said with Tzum and Chamar on Shavuos, is that if you look in the Gemara, we celebrate Shavuos on the 50th day. The Gemara implies that we receive the Torah on the 51st day of the Omer, which some of the Achronim say, oh, that's our remez that you have Yom Tov Sheini even for Shavuos, because even though we accepted the Torah on the 51st day, which is the second day of Yom Tov, so that's the remez for Yom Tov Sheini. So he said, maybe according to that, really it's the second day of Yom Tov, which is the more important day, because that's the day we receive the Torah. And then he says that's ridiculous, because we tell people in Israel aren't celebrating the real Shavuos. That's ridiculous. So the Minchas Yitzchak says, yes, you can go ahead and make Kiddush early. Now the problem is, he says, yes, you can make it early, but he limits it to what he calls a Shas Adchak, a dire situation. Here, what's the alternative? The alternative of not going is that nobody there is going to hear Kiddush and make Kiddush. So when the alternative is not hearing that, so yeah, it's better to make an early Yom Tov, and he allows it. The Shula Horas Nasan is Rav Nasan Gestetner. He passed away. I think he passed away. Lives in Bnei Brak. So he also talks about this idea of taking away the Kedusha from the second day to the first day. And he says, maybe this relates to something, Mark, you mentioned before, that there's no problem. Why? Because just because you're making Kiddush for the 8th day, why does that end, he's saying, the first day of Yom Tov? What are you ending? It's the same Kiddush you made on the first day of Yom Tov. It's not like because you're making Kiddush again, it's really marking any sort of conclusion to the first day. It's almost just a continuation of Yom Tov. So in such a case, there's no problem. When is there an issue?
That they use for Rosh Hashanah, right? That it's really one...
maybe.
Yeah.
But when is there an issue?
Yeah.
When you make Havdalah. If you're making Havdalah, so being Havdalah is Mavdil, you're making a clear distinction between yesterday and today. So if there's making Havdalah and you're distinguishing between the 2 days, so then it's clear that one day is ending and the next day is beginning. And
there's also the fact that it is Shabbos. If you're making Havdalah, there is a complete distinction, because
correct.
You're not cooking.
And that's why, for example, the Shulchan Aruch also says, in the case when you make Kiddush and Havdalah, when they both come together, so better to count Sphira before. Because in that case, once you're making Havdalah, you're making that distinction between day 1 and day 2, so maybe push that off. So that when Havdalah you want to push off. But if you're just making Kiddush, what is Kiddush? Kiddush isn't marking the end of a first day. You're just making Kiddush, the same Kiddush you made on the first day. There's no clear distinction, so that wouldn't be a problem as well. So the truth be told, there isn't much of an issue in terms of this idea of taking away the kedusha, the rights of the first day for the second day. Doesn't seem to be something that we're so concerned about, and seems to be something that most poskim argue with the Taz and say that's not a problem. So
what about the preparation of food
so that's issue number 2. The second issue that you have is hachana, is preparing from one day to the next. So there were some opinions, not on the sheet here, who not only wouldn't start their meal the second night until after whatever the time was, after Tzeis, but they wouldn't even daven Mariv until after Tzeis. They wouldn't even say Baruch Hu, which means you're getting home really late. Why? They were concerned that as soon as you said Baruch Hu, all the women around who were in the home preparing would hear Baruch Hu, and they would assume, oh, Baruch Hu, it's the next day of Yom Tov, I can start preparing. So if you daven Mariv early, then they would start preparing early from the first day of the second day. Now, I don't know about you, because we're saying Baruch Hu in here doesn't mean the woman and the men in all the other houses are hearing Baruch Hu. So,
okay, but even so, big deal. This is what I'm trying to say.
No,
what's the big deal?
Because if you're saying Baruch Hu early,
so you start to prepare. What's the difference?
Because it's still the first day.
No.
So this is going to go back to...
No, what I'm saying is, if you're preparing a meal, let's say you're saying Baruch Hu an hour early, right?
Yeah.
Let's say you wanted to eat anyways in that hour, so you were preparing food anyways. So I'm saying all you've done is...
So good. So that might be one of the reasons to allow it. But when it comes to...
Okay.
But let's say you're davening Mariv, Baruch Hu 20 minutes early. So you want to get home in time so you can start preparing as soon as
Okay.
Yom Tov is over. So in that case, so if you're Baruch Hu, they'll think it's second day, and then you're preparing for the next day. So that's why some German, I think, communities have the custom not to even say Baruch Hu. Now, truth be told, I think some people said, well, that depends out because the setup was, I guess they made a minyan, in the middle of the houses. So once you said Baruch Hu, everybody heard. If that's not the case, everybody's relying on a luach and relying on the calendar they have in the house. That shouldn't be a concern. So that's one issue with hachana. The second issue, I guess, which comes up relates to how we describe the Taz and the Maharshal, is that let's say you're bringing in. I don't want to formulate this. So what do we issue? We're concerned again that let's say, it's 3 o'clock. So what point can you start, like Mark said? So let's say you make mincha an hour earlier. Let's say you make it as early as possible. Well, if you start preparing to eat right then, to eat in that time period before it gets nightfall, that's not preparation for the next day. That's preparation for your meal right now, and that shouldn't be a problem. So I didn't see anyone discuss that. I think that far would make sense.
Yeah,
Unless there's a problem eating, so you ruin your enjoyment of your dinner meal for that.
No, but that is your dinner. That's the point. That is your dinner.
But you're eating it on the previous day. You're not eating it on the...
But because you're making it early...
So that's why you want to move it up. So if the second day starts at 9 o'clock, like in the Shavuos, that's crazy. Let's make...
But you ruin... you're supposed to eat at 9:30, but you're not really...
Well, who wants to eat at 9:30? I don't want to eat at 9:30.
But it's a chag. You're supposed to eat.
No, but that's the point. As long as you're eating in that time period before... if you're preparing for right now and you eat right now, it's not considered preparing for the next day. You're preparing for it now.
You're ruining your appetite for the...
No, but that's the point. That is your meal. It's not ruining your appetite for the chag. That is your meal. Your meal is starting just an hour earlier. So this is...
Why not?
If you make an early Yom Tov, meaning if you make it early...
Shabbos you do. What's the difference?
If you're making it early, that would be the point. So here's where I was shocked and where I started this year, and I guess I was arguing with Rav Shechter. Rav Shechter says, what's the solution? Solution to get rid of all these hachana problems is make daven at plug. So make it as early as possible, which is, let's say, an hour and 15 minutes earlier. So when you get home, let's say you have an hour until nightfall. So therefore, he says, you can even prepare early. Forget preparing now. You can prepare 5 hours earlier because it's still the same day. The day of Yom Tov hasn't ended yet. I know you've davened Marv and you're starting your meal for the second day, but that doesn't mean the first day is over. You haven't taken away the first day. And therefore, you can prepare even at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock for your meal
you said Marv
later on.
End the day?
No. This I think we'll get back. So, for example, again, let's say between the 2 days of Shavuos. Let's say Shavuos nightfall is at 8:45 and plug is at 7 o'clock. That was not the right time, so let's just take that for argument's sake. So Rav Shechter is saying, daven Marv at plug's at 7, so daven Marv at 7. You'll get home at 7:30. You still have an hour till nightfall. So you're eating your meal when it's still day. So you're eating your meal when it's still the first day of Yom Tov. So if you're eating your meal on the first day of Yom Tov, if you prepared 5 hours earlier, after you finish lunch, you prepare dinner, you're preparing for the first day, and there's no problem.
And then make Kiddush after.
No, you're making Kiddush then. Yeah, you're making Kiddush.
So where is your meal
so
the second day?
So first of all, let's just go back. I think he doesn't explain. I'm putting this into what Rav Shechter said, but I think that we can only explain that according to the Maharshal we said earlier. The Maharshal said you're able to have this idea where you can have these overlapping Kedushas at the same time, where the first day can be day 1, this time period can now be day 1 and day 2. So when it comes to issues of Hachana, it's still day 1, well, you can prepare earlier for that time right now. When it comes to making Kiddush and starting your meal, that's okay. It's day 2, you're allowed to make your Kiddush in that time period, and that would probably be the best solution for everybody and make everybody happy, so they wouldn't be like watching their clock when they can start preparing the food. And again, you're preparing for the first day for the first day. So what I thought was crazy when I heard that last year, I guess it's based, he doesn't say this explicitly, but the only way I can explain it is based on this idea where you're really able to have both the first day and the second day in that same time frame. So a similar issue which came up is talk about the Ben Ish Chai. He was in Baghdad. He was a rabbi there in the 19th, 20th century. So the issue there, they wanted to make an early Yom Tov Sheini of Shavuos. Why? Because there were a lot of mosquitoes, and they were really bad at night, and they were so bad they also would fall into your food, so you'd start eating mosquitoes. So they wanted to know, can they make an early Yom Tov Sheini of Shavuos? And the question was, can they light candles for the second night in that time frame? Can they light candles early, because they don't need candles, it's still light. So lighting candles, an hour before nightfall, considered preparing for the next day when you need them for an hour. So he says, no, it's not considered hakana for the next day. Why? Because there's an idea of making kiddush when you have candles. So it's true you might not be benefiting from the actual light of the candles, but you're lighting them for the purpose of right now. It's not considered hakana for the next day, and he allows you also to make an early Yom Tov Sheini to avoid, again, the mosquitoes, which I would also put, again, into this Shas HaDchak
the first night you have the same problem.
Category.
When you came up with Mimos, then you have...
So it could be that it overrides it. So for just to note that when I talked about the nursing home or the hospital question before with the Minchas Yitzchak, at the end of his tshuva he says, I don't know why he's only asking me about the second day because he probably assumes that the first day there's no problem making it early. He says, but it's the exact opposite. He says the first night, no way you can make early because of Tamimos. So it's interesting how the Minchas Yitzchak there said Tamimos was more important than everyone there hearing Kiddush, which is a bit, my mind seems a bit surprising. The Beit Midrash doesn't exactly describe that case, so I'm not sure. I'm not exactly entirely sure what he would say about that. So then I thought, well, why does Rav Shechter say anything about lighting candles? Well, that's because if you know Rav Shechter's interesting psakim, one of them is that you don't light candles for the second night of Yom Tov. He thinks, I don't know, he might be the only one to say this. I'm pretty sure, I know my uncle's a Talmud and my aunt does not light candles second day of Yom Tov. He thinks to bracha levatala because we all have lights now anyways, and you don't need it. We don't actually need the lights that you're lighting for them, and therefore you're lighting shalol tzorech and you're violating the halacha, malacha on Yom Tov, so you shouldn't light candles. I don't think anybody else will tell you that. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know of anybody else who gives that psak. So that's why he doesn't talk about
your grandfather?
Yeah, no, my grandmother for sure lit candles. So that really much deals with the hachana question. So when it comes to the hachana question, again, if you take the Rav Shechter approach that you can have this idea where the first and second day are overlapping, then not only if you're starting your second day, can you prepare right now, but you would even be able to start preparing a few hours earlier because it's still the first day. So that deals, I think, mainly with the hachana question. The third question that I mentioned here was the third issue on the sheet, this idea of tamimos, which I said, it's not really, I think most people said that's not really a big deal of tamimos. We don't really have to be concerned for the second day. Why not? Why aren't we concerned for tamimos on the second day? Because the whole idea of tamimos is that we're counting for sphira. But we're not even counting Sphira the first night of Shavuos. So, when it comes to Sphira, there's no Sfeika Dioma. So even though, we keep 2 days of Yom Tov because of Sfeika Dioma, we don't count 2 days of Sphira. Now, there's no question. When it comes to Sphira, we're not saying, today's the second and third day of Sphira. Right. So, it doesn't make sense to talk about the second day of Yom Tov being an issue of Tamimos. Tamimos of what? The Sphira already ended the day before. So, some are machmir. I think most people don't think that's reason enough in order to be concerned about the issue. So the truth of the matter is, when you look at the poskim who talk about the issue, talk about the question, they're overwhelmingly mekel, and they allow it. Now the problem is they always allow it. They always add this caveat of shas l'tchak, that in dire situations you could do it. So I didn't speak to Rabbi Kaufman. I asked Rabbi Grisman. So why? I asked Rabbi Grisman. So why don't we daven early? If there's, he says, sometimes just because you can prove in the sources that the minhag is not to do it, so you continue, you continue to do that just because you can prove otherwise, and that's not reason enough. Now the question that would ultimately become is, is Toronto Shas Chak? If you could start your Yom Tov meal the second night at 8 o'clock versus starting it at 10 o'clock, maybe that's also, there's Simchas Yom Tov, if you have kids, your kids can maybe do the meal at 8, they can't be at the meal at 10. Is that reason enough? So obviously, I don't know, I guess the rabbis in North America either don't think that, or I don't exactly know. Or maybe they argue and they adopt the approach of the Taz. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what the svara is, or maybe everyone just follows status quo and they look at the bulletin from the year before, and the year before they didn't do it. I don't exactly know, and I'm not out on like a crusade to get the shul to change it.
How about a different crusade?
Yeah.
Will there ever be a time, without saying when Mashiach comes, that there will be a movement among Orthodox rabbis to get away with the second day completely?
No.
It'll never.
No.
Everybody's bought into it. And
Yeah.
No way.
It's it's a minhag that's accepted from the times of the Gemara, and that's not something that will ever. No, that's not something that I think halachically you can get rid of.
Okay.
That's, for example, that's what I thought, but that was one of the first things the Reform movement tried to get rid of. So even if you'd ignore the halachic ramifications of it, which again would not allow it.
Yeah.
The fact that the Reform movement I was into it would be another reason not to.
Okay.
But you don't even have to get there. I don't think it doesn't even reach that point where you're only doing it to argue with the Reform.
Just one quick one.
Yeah.
The second day Yom Tov, one way or the other.
Yeah.
Everything is midrabanan as opposed to midoraita in terms of the halachas.
And therefore,
No, I'm just
Just a
asking
statement,
whether that's
question.
Oh, is that
True. Is that valid?
is that true?
Yeah.
Yes, I think we assume that the second day is Darabanan and the first day is Daraisa.
Okay, so nothing that we do as a malacha it just provides for more.
Well, I
leniency.
So that does provide for more leniency. So yeah, that's what I talked about him, on Shavuos itself. I talked about we are more lenient in certain areas, but not in all that much. I don't think we're going to start saying, Sabek Darabanan Lekula for everything on Yom Tov Sheini, because you want to.
Asking a non-Jew or
you'll be
somebody
done.
else to do to do stuff for you on the second day versus the first day, or
So the Shulchan Aruch doesn't make a distinction in that area. The Shulchan Aruch only makes distinctions with respect to burying. Well, the Gemara makes distinctions in terms of burying a dead person, in terms of taking medicine, in terms of there's no issur of taking medicine on the second day of Yom Tov, and then talked about the Pri Chadash also allowing putting out fires in certain putting out a fire to allow a man to be intimate with his wife, etc. But they don't talk about Amir Luchah, so I'm not sure that would.
Okay, just because it seemed to me there'd be a shvut. The shvut would be a much
correct, but I think then that would be too easy to almost then if you treat the whole day like that, then you can just have a non-Jew do everything for you, and then that will essentially just get rid of the Yom Tov. So that is not allowed.
And in my case, I've talked to you about it before, I put on tefillin on the last day.
Okay, so that's
Yeah.
Putting on tefillin is a separate issue. People, if you're in Israel and you're here, what do you do? Putting on tefillin, I don't know if you heard Rabbi Rekefet, he talked about that.
Well, I got from Robert Tuchiner.
On Thursday night, Rabbi Rekefet actually mentioned this in his talks. This idea, he was in, because he was in Chosarts for Yom Tov Sheini. So what did he do? So he said he kept the full second day of Yom Tov, but he put on tefillin. He didn't make a bracha. He put on tefillin, and he said, he made the condition, if it's chol, then this is my tefillin. If it's not, then I'm putting on something nice or something like that.
But it's the rise of versus.
Correct, but also putting on tefillin again. There's no malacha involved, so you're not. Again, the stakes aren't so high. Maybe motzah, I'm saying, but the stakes aren't so high.
Actually, one of the things I did encounter when I was reading was, for instance, showering on the second day of Yom Tov would become much more of a leniency in terms of the rules.
Most people hold you can shower on the first day too.
Well, there are, but
and there are many who say. I mean, the halacha says yes. For some reason now people are more machmir and they don't allow it in certain situations. But
was it you that said it that night about that? It doesn't necessarily, like cooking doesn't necessarily have to be like warming. Something doesn't have to be for food necessarily.
Davar shabbat l'chol nefesh. So that's part of the machlokes, and that's part of we're more lenient for that idea on the second day, on the first day. So that would be part of the issue. So just to conclude, if you look at the in terms of the poskim, again I quoted Rav Shechter and Rav Gestetner and the Minchas Yitzchak, and I didn't quote a question also, but the Chassid Sofer's grandson. You have all these poskim who talk about the issue, and they're all lenient in certain. They're all lenient in certain situations, but they almost. Rav Shechter doesn't mention it, but the other ones mention this idea of Shas Adchak. So the question is, do we have a Shas Adchak? Is what we encounter now considered a Shas Adchak? Yes or no? And just because we can change it, does that mean we should change it or it will be changed? That's another issue. So that I hope sums up the issue of making an early Yom Tov Sheini, and see everyone next week.